Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. New Year. With the help of Hashem, we are learning ERUVIN DAF Nun Hey. We're going to be concluding the sugya of connecting to the Kedusha of Torah, of that which we should do, which we could do, and therefore should do, to be able to retain better, to remember better the Torah that we learned. And on the beginning of DAF Nun Hey, we're going to come back to Masechtas ERUVIN. And as we began this Perek, learning the two leniencies, number one, that at times we are able to expand the boundaries of the city itself before you begin measuring the 2,000 amos. And in other words, we're going to add to the place of the city a leniency. And then we're going to learn the second leniency is that when we count, when we add, when we measure the 2,000 amos, it's also done in a way, lekula, that really adds a lot more place, a lot more square amma footage than people think, as we'll begin to better explain as we learn the sugya. It's extremely important for people to have pictures when they learn the following dafim. Again, we're going to be learning from now on. Someone gifted me, and I thank whoever gave me this gift. This is from Oiz V'Hadar publication from the Masifta Gemara. I have phenomenal pictures, or any other pictures that you have will be extremely helpful. We're going to be learning the case of the Mishnah of Gedudiyos. We're going to be explaining that any city, to define a city, you have to have at least 3 chatzeros, each one having 2 houses. If you don't even have that, even if there's going to be many huts built together, we do not consider that a city. And therefore, when it comes to Erev Tchumen, you would only have 2,000 amas outside your little hut. And we wouldn't say, first you have the whole city. The whole city is Daled Amas, and only then you begin counting. We will also go back into some Agadah. We're going to be learning about the quality, the advantage or the disadvantage of eating vegetables. You have one chazal that says that Kol Ir She'ein Ba Yarak Ein Talmud Chacham Rishoy Ladruba, because vegetables are relatively inexpensive and it's so healthy, so it's beneficial to live where you have access to vegetables. We're going to have another chazal that speak about the detriment of vegetables. We're going to try to reconcile that and a lot more. Again, we left off on Daf Nun Daled on the base, 5 lines before the bottom of the Amid, right towards the end of the line. Amar Rab Chizda. Continues the Gemara. Amar Rab Chizda. Ein Torah niknes ela b'siman. That in order, the way we're learning the pshat, to retain that which you learned, to be able to not only remember it, but to remember the sequence of what is taught after what, you have to make simanim, you have to make mnemonics. Everyone gets to make their own mnemonics. But when you master a topic and you link it to a siman, and then you master another topic and you link it to another siman, then all you need to do is you have to chazer the simanim one after the other. Many times, as we see in the Gemara, they make from the simanim certain words or certain sentences. And that's the way we remember the sequence. And what's the source of that shenemar? Even though it works, everything has to be sourced in the Torah. When it says in Vayelech Sima B'fiem, put the Torah in their mouths. So say Chazal, Al Tikra Sima, Ela Sima Nom, Gavaldik. In other words, we have to make for ourselves a siman that we place in our mouths. Now, Shema Rav Tachlif Mamaravam, when he heard this Chazal, when he heard this limud, so he's Azal Amara Kamed Rababo, and Amar Rababo tells him that Atun Mehasan Masnisula, but Anan, we have another source for it. Mahacha Masnina, no, we have a pasuk in Yirmiyah where it says Hatzivi Loch Tziyunim, which means set up signs for yourself. Simi Loch, make them for you. You make your own simanim, which means asu tziyunim la Torah. A sign means a sign for the Torah. Umay mashma the height tziyun lishna the simanahu, because it says in Yecheskel, the ra etzem adam uvana etzleit tziyon. So making a tziyon, making a stone by the burial, that word tziyon is similar to the concept of making a tziyon for the Torah that we're learning. We have another source, says the Gemara Rabbi Lazar Amar Mahacha. It says Emor lachochma achoisiyot, that we should become so connected to wisdom. We should be familiar with wisdom as one is with one sister. So say to wisdom, you're my sister. Moida means a relative. Al pip shat lebina tikra. That bina should be like our relative. So here we have now a limud, a drush, that umoida means that asay moidaim, make signs for the Torah. Become familiar with it. Dafka through making simanim. Just to say, bekitzer, that we have apipnimias HaTorah, the idea of a siman isn't only to remember the sequence, but it's actually to better connect to the pnimias HaTorah, to the light of the Torah, and not only to the external part of the Torah, which is to the wisdom of the Torah. When we remember the whole time that the Torah that we're learning is only a siman to a much higher Torah. Every world has a Torah. The neshamot of the Torah is the same. It manifests according to the language of each and every world. So when we learn the Torah of this world, Shnai Moichsem Metalis, right? What do we have, I think, in the Hayom Yom? That in Gan Eden, what's the Shnai Moichsem Metalis? That there is a neshama that was brought back to be connected to Torah and mitzvahs. And two people are claiming credit for that. That Ani Mitzvah, Ani Mitzvah, the Teichen is the same. The manifestation is not the same. So we should remember that the Torah that we're learning, like the base of the Bereshis, is the siman of even a higher level of Torah. Rabbi says, now that we quoted this pasuk, that umoida labina tikra, another limud, that asay moyadim la Torah, which is the concept of kvius itam la Torah, a point, fixed times to learn Torah. Daf nun hey amad alef on top of the amid. Behind the amid of Abdimi Barchama Bardoisa, Maidich Siv, a pasuk in Etzavim, that loy bashumayim, loy me'ever layami. What does that imply? That she'im bashumayim, if the Torah would have been in the heavens, then atot tzaddik la'ali sachara, then we would be required to make an effort to pursue it. And if me'ever layami atot tzaddik la'avad achreil, in other words, the concept of making a fixed time, making a fixed time is not so simple, because other things come up. Making a fixed time demands a certain amount of sacrifice, that during my time committed for learning, I'm not going to delay it for later. No matter what happens, I'm going to stick to my times. And this type of effort, the pshat is, Moshe Rabbeinu was telling us, you don't need to make an effort. But what he's really telling us is that when there is a need, then you have to make the effort. You know what type of effort? The effort needed to go to the heavens. The effort needed to cross the sea. Rabbi says that we also learn from the implication of the pasuk in Tzavim, loy bashumayim, meaning that loy timatze b'misha magbia dati olav kashamayim. Torah will not be found by someone who considers themselves to be already in the heavens. Explains the Marsha, Torah will not be found if someone doesn't have for themselves a Rebbe. That for him, for the learner, the Rebbe is in the heavens. Then you'll properly receive the Torah. And when it says it's not across the sea, that means a person who thinks, the way the Marsha says, that they're so broad-minded that once they learned it once, they already have it. They make an effort to learn it again and to learn it again. And quickly coming back to the Seder Mishnah that we learned on the previous year, the big kasha in the Seder Mishnah is that where is Yeshua? And one of the insights that we have in Hasidus is that the concept in Pirkei Avos of Moshe to keep Torah Misinai, Umasarali Yeshua, like we mentioned, and then Zakanim, Nevi'im, and Anshe Knesset Agdola, these are three prerequisites to acquire the Torah. It doesn't speak to the other fact, as we learned in the last year, that Moshe Rabbeinu, when he got it, he taught it first to Aaron, and then he taught it to Banav. Now it's possible that Yeshua, that was not L'Yamish Matei Chayil, was always with Moshe. He was always with Moshe. The Vart is like this. The Rebbe says like this, that Moshe Rabbeinu represents Anivus. And that's the first chazal over here. Loi b'shamayim. We have to connect ourselves to Moshe Rabbeinu. He will instill in us the anivus for us to remember that we're not in the heavens. That's prerequisite number one. Prerequisite number two is the concept of Yeshua. First Moshe, then Yeshua. What's the concept of Yeshua? Diligence. Nar lo yamish m'toichayil. Mamish what it says. That lo timotze b'misha marchid dati olav. Kayam, as the Marsha explains. You have to learn it once, you have to learn it again. That's the concept of chazorah, the concept of making an effort, the concept of making simonim, both the pshat to help you remember, the simonim to remember that what we're learning is only the chesonius of the Torah, and to desire and to yearn to connect to the pnimius of Torah. All of that is the character trait of Yeshua, which is a prerequisite that we need to be able to properly connect to the Torah. Okay, finally, Rabbi Yechanan Omar, Loi b'shmaimi, Loi timatzi b'gasei ruach, and Loi me'evalayami, Loi timatzi Loi b'sacharonim. You won't find Torah, not by people that have to travel the whole time, or Loi b'tagorim, nor people that are peddlers that are not spending time in one place, because a person who wants to acquire the Torah, says Rabbi Yechanan, needs to spend most of his time learning Torah. Or to word this other words in another way, that if a person is a balesik, that during the times that he or she have fixed to learn Torah, they should be then like a person who's Torah sayumanasai. There should be no worries in the world during that time. The walls can fall down, but they're going to keep on learning. And that's a character trait that you find by people that have no other occupation other than learning Torah. Okay, now my friends, we're coming back to Masechtas ERUVIN. And we're going to have a brisa right 11 times from the top of the Amid, Tanach Rabbanon, that's going to further elaborate the dinim that we learned in the Mishnah. But again, the nekuda of the Mishnah is twofold. There are two leniencies in the Mishnah. Aleph, based on the fact that if you're kind of shvisa in a enclosed area, well, that's clear. So the enclosed area is daladamas, like daladamas. You only begin counting the tchum outside the enclosed area. Well, an enclosed area is very clear. You start counting it when you leave the area. But there's also the same concept by a city, that if you're kind of shvisa in a city, the city is daladamas. Now, establishing boundaries to the city is not so simple. And not so simple, we're going lakula. In other words, there's going to be times that you might think that the city ended. Now we have to start counting the 2,000 amas. So the first rule in the Mishnah that's going to be elaborated is no. Many times, first we extend the boundaries of the city. And all of that will be included in your dalad amas. And then we measure the 2,000 amas. And in that measurement, again, we will measure it in a way that it will actually include a lot more place than you think. So it's going to be like a double kula regarding how far out of the city may you carry before you hit the tchum. Okay, so Chavra, take out, which you're learning Rabbi Steinsaltz, Evan Yisrael, you're learning the art scroll, you're learning any other Gavaldik Gemara with pictures. I know I'm not going to show it, you guys, you have to have your pictures ready in order for us to cover. It's very easy dinim, but if you see it, then it moves. If you don't see it, then we get stuck. Tanach Rabbanan says the Braisa, Ketzad Ma'abrim Esaharim. How do we extend the first kul of the Mishnah? How do you establish the boundaries of the city before you put the tchum? So if the Mishnah says, if the Braisa says, if the city is arucha means that it is rectangular or square, it's not circular. So then says the Braisa, Kamay then you can't extend it. In every single stanza in the Braisa, the Gemara is going to ask either Pshita or we don't understand it. We're going to take it apart as the Gemara begins to explain it. But let's first go through the Braisa. If the Mishnah is Agula, if it's circular, then Oisim Lazavius, you make corners for it, which is a tremendous leniency. It's easy even to picture that, because that means that you don't count from the boundary of the city. You don't count from the boundary of the city. First, you make a square around the circle. So the diameter will be the same, but you gain the entire circular area. The corner areas you add, it's part of the city. You don't even begin counting the 2,000 amas until you leave the corners. If it's not perfectly square or perfectly rectangular, but if on one side it's much broader and on the other side it's narrower. So here you will also box it out. And again, that will be adding, the narrow side will be viewed as if it is just as wide. Now, if one house is protruding, as normally a tower would protrude from the city, so that one house's protrusion will extend the boundary of that entire side of the city. Or Shnei Bottom Yoitzim, if there are two houses that are extending. Now the Gemara is going to ask the obvious: if even one house extends the boundary of that side, then Avada, if there are two houses, we'll see that in the Gemara. So we make believe as if there is a string that is extended, on that side of the house or from one house to the other. And again, that extends the boundary of the city. All of that will be included in the halachic daladamas of the city. And then Weiter says the Brais. If the city is like a bow, right? The city is like a bow, it's like a smiley face. So now, or if it's like a gam is the Greek letter known as gamma. So that's going to be some sort of a right angle. So first of all, we ki'ilu fill in the entire smiley face area. We fill in the entire right angle. And then once you have that filled in, only from there further, end of Bryson. And again, we're going to go over every single case. Okay, so for people who don't have any books, if you're watching this online, if you can take a snapshot of my sefer over here, you're going to have all of the cases that we just mentioned. Okay, says the Gemara, Amar. First case in the Braisa was that Arucha, that if the city literally means it's long, that means it's already squared or rectangular, but in other words, all of the lines are equally. So the Braisa says, you leave it as is, you can't add anything. Answers the Gemara, no, it's not Pshita, Loi. It's needed, because in the Mishnah we spoke about a square. What happens if it's not a square, if it's rectangular? So you might have thought that the width that is less than the length should halachically be extended to make it first into the square and then only count from there the 2,000 amas. Kumash Malan, that since all the lines are equal, it's not that one side is narrow and one side is wide, that you leave it the way it is. Next case, Mirubas. If it's already square, then ain't oisin lazavius, right? Then you don't make corners for it. Now, if it's square, if it's circular, right? I hope I didn't skip the line when we learned it. Right? Agula oisin lazavius. Mirubas ain't oisin lazavius. I think I skipped that line. And again, what's of course, if it's square, how can you make corners for it? Pshita. So here the Gemara gives the Gavaldic answer. Boy, tzricha dimiraba v'lemiraba b'ribu ha'olam. We're speaking about a square that's not positioned, it's not aligned with the directions of the world. What does that mean? When we have the case of the circular, and the Mishnah says you put the circle in the square and you gain the corners. So hold on, how exactly do you place the square? And the answer is when you are placing this halachic square around, beyond the circle, you are aligning it in the directions of north, south, east, and west. In other words, due north in the world is where you put kilo, the line of north, and so on and so forth. However, that is only because there is no square. So when you are placing this halachic square, it should be aligned to the ruchos of the world. But when you have already a square, you might have thought you also have to have it in the direction of the due north, due south, due east, and due west. And that would mean that if the city was built in a way where, if you can just imagine that it's exactly 90 degrees off that, then maybe you make a box around the box to have, again, a lines facing the directions of the world. And then you would gain a lot more space that would have been included in the city. One might have thought you do that as well. So now the tema, just like by the circle city, when we do halachically place a square, we do place the square. We have to draw these lines, again, aligned with the ruches of the olam. So maybe even though this is already squared, but make another square around it, again, gaining a lot of space, That no, when there's like a circle, there's no square. So when you place the square, how do you align it? According to the ruchos of the world. But if the city is already squared or rectangular, in other words, the lines are straight, so then no, then you can't place another box around it. You can't add all of that space as well. Right. The next case in the Braisa was if there was only one house protruding like a tower, or if there were two houses, then you draw a line right on that side. It extends the boundary of that ruach. So that you get to extend the city. So Shnei Batim Ibaya, and the Havamina was because they are on the same side. And here for the picture book, here is the box. I don't know if you can see this, the box around the box. And here you have the case that we're talking about. If only one house goes out, you extend this direction. So if two houses go out for sure, answers the Gemara Loi, that the case of the Braisa is needed when Mishtei Ruchais. It's not in the same direction. You would think you only get to extend it. Let's say this is east. You didn't put east in the front. You would think that this is, if it's all on the east side, you get to extend the east side. But if one is in the east, and from the other side of the city, there's also only one house here and another house on the other side, which will bring even a greater expansion of the boundaries in both sides. Maybe not. That you would think, excuse me, but so that's the Braisa adding that if you have two batim not on the same side, on opposite sides or on perpendicular sides, but on two separate sides, that you get to extend that as well. And now we will spend relatively a nice amount of time on the case of a keshes of a bow. So here you have a city shaped like a bow, and so the city, the bow area is filled with houses, but that's how they built a city. So the Mishnah taught us that you ki'ilu place a bowstring from one edge to the other edge, from the end of the arm. You can call them two arms, we can call them a smile, and you only start counting the 2,000 amas beyond the halachic bowstring. Says the Gemara, or if it was made like a gam, I mean, whatever we're learning now goes to both. Gam is the same thing, but it's a right angle, right? It looks like a letter gamma, but we're going to speak more about the keshes. We're just going to use that as the case to debate, to discuss. Oikaman gam says the Braisa royin we fill it up. All of that area is still part of the daladamas of the city. Why did they man all halon? And only from after, we'll call this an imaginary bowstring that connects the two highest sides or lowest sides if you're making a frown. And only from there do you count, right, the 2,000 am. So begins the Gemara Amar Rav Huna. I want you to know that even though the Braisa gave us a blanket statement, we're going to limit it. If my friends, if walking, I hold my book upside down before I think. Anyways, here is my smiley face is better than a frown. It's all the same thing. That if between one end and the other end is less than 4,000 amas, which means that if someone is living on the top of the smile and they're not going away from the city, they're going to the other smile. If they need to walk less than 4,000 amas, now the tchum is normally 2,000 amas, so they're going to walk 2,000 amas. They'll be stuck. Seder, hold before we add the Mishnah's rule, the Braisa's rule. But if someone else is walking from the other end, if it's less than 4,000 amas, then in the middle there's going to be at least one amma that overlaps both sides. So if the 2,000 amma going out from one side overlaps the 2,000 amma going out from the other side, it is only here where the Mishnah says the rule that we make a bowstring. And we actually say it's keilu, it's full, which is amazing. So without a native tchumen, they can walk. They can walk from one side to the other because they're walking within the city. But that's only, again, if you have less than 4,000 amas. Then you only measure when you're going further away further away from the smiley face, that's where you put a bowstring, a halachic bowstring, which is what we learned in the Mishnah now in the Baraisa. You fill this up with houses, and when you're going this way, you start counting the 2,000 amas, not from the center houses, which will give you much less. No, but from all the way on the top. However, but if in between one edge, one arm, and the other arm, there is 4,000 amas, that means that if people were to walk from here to the center and from other side to the center, there would be no overlap, even though it's 4,000 amas, which means they would come right near each other. If there is no overlap, then we don't apply the din of the Mishnah. Then we don't make believe as if this is filled with houses and chatzeros. And when you measure 2,000 amas going up, we can measure it only from this imagined halachic boast. You don't do that. Then when you're counting 2,000 amas from houses over here, you start counting from the bow itself, from here, and not from the bowstring that the Mishnah and Baraisa says you can place, because the Mishnah and the Baraisa was only speaking when you have less than 4,000 amas from one top of the arm to the other when you're walking from one towards the other. With the picture, I hope that's clear. Without the picture, it takes a little bit more time to chop. Okay. Did Rafuna say this? Rafuna, I'm sorry. That if you have a city and the city itself was breached, now there's a gap in between it. And according to the Havamina right now, the breach did not go through and through. So at one side of the city, there's still homes. So this is mamish like the bow. It's only open from one side. So again, when do we say that when you're measuring 2,000 amas from the top of the city upwards, that you fill up the breach with halachic houses and you get to begin the 2,000 amas beyond that line? Says Rav Huna, only if there's 141 and a third amas or less in between the two sides. Not 3,999 amas, not less than 4,000. It has to have the number of 149 and a third. Now, where do we get 141 and a third? We get this din from the din of a karpef. If you remember, we already spoke about the karpef, right? Karpef is 70 amas and 2/3 of an amma times 70 amas and 2/3 of an amma. And remember that if you have an area, even though it's enclosed, if it's not hukaf ledira, if it's larger than that shiur, then midrabanan you can't carry in there. Now, a karpef is a typical space that a city would leave at its boundary, and they would use it for storing items that the city continuously uses. So Chazal say that if we're going to learn a lot about this later, that if there is going to be a little house, as long as this little house is within the karpef area, which means that it's within 70 amas and 2/3 of an amma, then it extends the boundary of the city. So what Rav Huna wants that each side of the breach, if you're walking from one to the other, you won't have to walk more than the 70 amas and 2/3. If you have that space for each side, we can consider that an extension of the city. So since both sides get to have their own 70 amas and 2/3 of an amma, add that up together, you have 141 and 2/3. So that is the shiur, which is much less. That only if it's that amount or less is where we connect one side with the other. What is Rav Huna saying over here? That when you have the bow, as long as it is a drop less than 4,000 amas, then we connect one side to the other. That's a kasha. So answers the Gemara, Amar Rabba Bar Ula loy kasha. Kan, in our Braisa, as in the Mishnah, the opening, whether it's the keshes, whether it's the gam, is only beruach hachas, like we have the pictures. In other words, one side of the city connects. If you were to walk within the bow, you can walk from one end to the other. You just walk around it. So that's why we allow for a lot more space to connect one side with the other. Taka, Rav Huna limits what it says in the Braisa. It can be 4,000 amas or more, but if it's under that, then we connect it. But over here, when we just learned about the 141 and a bit and a third, that's because the city is breached, mishtei ruchos. So you used to have a city, one square, and then it was charav in the middle. Now, if I'm living in this city and I'm going in that direction, from where do I count my 2,000 amas? So that's what we're learning. If there is 141 and a third or less in between these two cities, then we connect these two cities together. And if I'm living in this side and I'm going in that direction, here, yeah, I only start counting my 2,000 amas when I leave the boundary of the other city. And if it's going to be a drop more than that, then I can't do that, because now I'll view these two cities as separated because they are completely disconnected. Okay, now that we resolved the contradiction, now we'll analyze the din of Rav Huna regarding the complete breach city, right? That's breached now, mishtei ruches. Umay kumash malam. So what is Rav Huna telling us when it comes to two cities that are now adjacent one to the other? That that we allow each city its own 70 amas and 2/3, which is why, again, I know it's not 3,999, but it's still a leniency. That means we're saying that if the breach is up to 141 and a bit, we still connect them. I know that's a chiddush, because you can argue that maybe you only allow one karpef for both in-betweens. And if it's more than 70 and 2/3, you don't connect them. So if that is the chiddush of Rav Huna, I'm not going to find the stira, but the problem will be, he already gave his position on that, based on the Mishnah that we're going to have, the Tanach, Chevra, Daf Nun, Hayom is based, that Noistin Karpov Lo'ir, every city, forget about a breach city, forget about neighboring cities. B'chlal, you have a city that you allow for each city an area of a Karpov, period. And when you start counting the 2,000 amas, you only go beyond that outdoor storage area, which is the shiur of 70 amas and 2/3 of an amma. These are the words of Rav Meir. Chachamim say that no, that you only allow a karpev if you are in between two cities. If you still have a city, if there is a hut, if there is a house, that extends the city l'kula alma. And we say that if the house is within the karpav, as long as the house is not beyond the 70 amas and a bit, then you extend it to the house. But if there's no house at all, stam to give a karpev to say that you only start counting the 2,000 amas after you leave the city, plus at 70 amas, we don't say that. But if you are in between two cities, say the chachamim, then you don't need a house. Yes, by default, we give the area in between the karpev. Now, what did the chachamim mean? Do you give to each side a karpev, or do you only give one karpev for both? That's the machlokas amaroim. And the itmar, Rav Huna says the chachamim are teaching us karpav lezu v'karpav lezu, which is exactly l'chora what he's saying over here, which is why he's allowing 141, right, and not half that amount. Chia Barav says no. The chachamim mean to say a noistan el karpav echad l'shneim. So if you have two cities and they are beyond the 70 amas and the 2/3 of the amma, we don't connect them. Again, so if I'm beginning my Shabbos in this city and I'm going towards the direction of the other city, the moment I leave my city's boundaries, I begin counting the 2,000 amma. I don't get to say, oh, it's all one city and therefore it's all daladamas, and I can go from my city to the other city without eating up a single amma for my tchum. We don't say that. So here again, we already find that Rav Huna gives a karpaf to each city. So why did he have to repeat this din twice? Answers the Gemara, it's needed tzricha, because the Ashmin and Hachem means in our case of the breach city, it began as one city. Now there's a breach. I would say Mishum Dahavi Leitzad Heter Mikara, because in the beginning it was an undivided city. Yes, if I was shoyvis in that city, I only begin counting my 2,000 amas when I leave any side of the city, even the furthest most side of the city. But over there, in the case where Funa is debating Chia Barav in the Mishnah, it was two cities. Maybe not. Maybe he'll be moida that you only allow Chachamim, only allow one karpa for Natu. That's why he needed to give his opinion over there. Now, Ashmin and Hassan, I would argue, why is he lenient? Why does he allow even a double karpaf? And if you have that area and not more, you connect the cities. Because since we're speaking about two cities that were from the beginning were two, and like we mentioned, people would make use, city people or the city would make use of the area right outside their city. They would use it to store things that were used in the city. So from the outset, each city used its karpaf, that area. And therefore, from the beginning, yeah, every city has its own karpaf. And if you're going to take away, you're going to say you only allow one karpa for both cities. It's going to be very difficult. You're limiting the use. So Taka, every city has its own karpa. But over here, you can't say that because over here, it only was one city. It got breached later. Lav Dafka, it's going to be difficult. People did not make use of that space. Maybe here, Rafuna's Moide, you only allow one karpa area to connect the cities, and if it's more than 70 amos and 2/3, it's already two separate cities. So therefore, he needed to give his opinion here also. No, you allow up until 141, right? But coming back to our Mishnah of the bow or of the gamma, it's a whole different limit. That from the top of the smile to the other top of the smile, when do we apply the Mishnah, din of the Mishnah and of the Baraisa, that we make this imaginary bowstring? As long as you don't have 4,000 amos. We dafka need an overlap if someone is working from one side to the other, that these two people should overlap with each other, and then we do apply this gavaldic leniency that we fill it up with halachic houses and chatzeros, and if a person is going away from this entire bow, they only begin counting the 2,000 amos from the bow string and not from the bow. Now, another detail that was not spoken about yet. We until now were mentioning the width between the two edges of the bows. Can be 4,000, has to be less than 4,000 amos. Now we have another kasha. What happens if the center of the bow, if you were to place the bowstring, what happens if it's 2,000 amos away from the bowstring? Do we still place a bowstring? Or maybe here also we say the same concept, that as long as the bowstring is less than 2,000 amos away from the center, that's when we can place it. But if you have to walk mamish 2,000 amos, which is a whole tchum, until you get to this bowstring, maybe you're not allowed to place it. How much space do we allow? Is there a limit? And indeed, the first Amoida, Rabbi Barafuna says that it's alpayim amma. In other words, if it's more than 2,000 amos, if from the bottom lowest part of this bow, the middle, which will be the middle, until this imaginary bowstring, if it's more than 2,000 amos, you cannot place it there. However, Rabbi Barafuna says, no, here there's no limit. Yes, and Afuna made a limit from one side to the other. We need for there to be an overlap. That means it has to be less than 4,000 amos. But once you have that max of 3,999 and not more, I don't care how deep the smile goes. I don't care how much lower is the bowstring, the halachic bowstring from the center of the keshes. And says Abaye, it makes sense. Because what would be the logic to place a limit? Because if you're walking from the center, from the bottom of the keshes up to the bowstring, if it's more than 2,000 amas, then you have to go beyond the tchum to get to this imaginary. That we don't do. No, if you want to get to the bowstring, you don't have to walk straight up. You can walk through the area, through the bow. And once you come to the top, we mentioned, when you walk across, right, you're going to overlap, it's less than 4,000 amas. So you can basically walk the entire bowstring before you place it, before you make the bowstring. Right, you can walk up the side and then walk out. And you, as long as you're not walking beyond 2,000 amos, you didn't go beyond the tchum. So since you can walk on any place of the bowstring, no matter how much higher it is from the center, I don't place a limit. I don't care if there's more than 2,000 amos from the center until the top. Okay, next. I'm sorry, that was the end of the Braisa. And now, the Braisa was an elaboration of the Mishnah. Now the Gemara is actually going back to the Mishnah in the beginning of Perek Ketzad Ma'abrim. So the Mishnah spoke about Hayu Sham Gidudiyos. Gidudiyos are churvas, are what used to be houses, but now they're no longer houses. So as long as they are still considered something, we'll see how much has to remain, and they are high 10 tvachim. So that's a house of the city. So it extends the city, even though no one is living in there. Says the Gemara, "My Gidudiyos, Amar Rav Yehuda." For it to still be considered something of significance, it has to have 3 mechitzas, even though there is no roof. So it's a churva. It's a ruin. The roof fell off, one wall fell off, but there's still 3 walls. It's still considered the house. It's still an extension of the city. When you, Rav Yehuda, are speaking about 3 walls without a roof, what would be your opinion if there's only 2 walls, but there is a roof? Mahu. So Tashema, we learned in the Braisa, Elu Shema Abram Imam. Here the Braisa is elaborating what types of homes or other structures are we allowed to use to extend the boundary of the city and only begin measuring the 2,000 amas beyond it. So here we go. Obviously a house, but we're going to speak about other locations like we had in the Mishnah that you would lav dafka call a house, but that's the chiddush. Number 1 is nefesh. Nefesh is a building that people would build on a cave, right? A tomb building. And it was common then for people to place these types of tomb buildings called a nefesh for a shomer to be there. The fact that it's a cave doesn't make it into a living place to extend the city. But if a living being, if there's a structure made for a shomer, it's called a home enough for you to use this. It's still part of the city. Nefesh that has the size in it of at least 4 amas by 4 amas. Or like we had in the Mishnah, a geshet, a bridge. Now, not every bridge, a bridge that has in it a booth for the tax collector, right? Or even a cave, any type of beis hakvaris. If in that beis hakvaris, sheyesh ba beis dira. Another chiddush, ubeis hakneses. By the way, it was very common for the shuls to be outside the city. Now a shul, even though it's God's home, a shul is not considered the house that per se would extend the city. But if you have a beis hakneses that also has in it a room made for the shamish, so there is living quarters, then that is considered part of the city. Ubeis hakneses, sheyesh ba beis dira lachazan. Guys, chazan here doesn't mean what we call a chazan, it means a shamish. Or lahavdil, similarly, if you have a beis averis kichavim, also, sheyesh ba beis dira likoimarim. If it's just a beis avodah zarah for prayer, then also it doesn't extend the city. But if there's a living quarters in there, then it does. That's a stable. But again, stables for animals by themselves is not considered the structure that extends the city. If they have in there a room for in English, for the stable boy, right? Or if you have silos, you have storage areas. Again, the storage area per se, because he's storing grain, that's not considered a bias. But if these two, v'yesh bohen beis dira doesn't mean to sleep there. It can mean only a place for the shomer there that extends it. And the habayis shabayam, a house, so you have an island and you have a city in the island, and then away from the city, mamish by the coast, there's a little home. Today, that would be the most beautiful home. You have a sea view, but it didn't work that way. In the times of Chazal, people did not live there. And there's a chiddush here again, because if people are not living in the home, then not every building by just an oitzer is not enough of a house to extend the boundary. We'll see soon who lives there. So these are considered structures that extend the city, and therefore it's ma'abed. Let's go with ha'ayin. It's ke'ilu. We view that as a bulge with all the chidushim, and then we get to make a line, and that line will extend the entire boundary to the end of that bulge. Now continues the Braisa, ve'elu she'im ha'abrim. Number 1, and that's going to be related to the boya that we had. If you have a nefesh, if you have this tomb building, that it's 4 walls and a roof, and now 2 of them are breached, so there's only 2 walls that remain. Now the havamina obviously is that there's still a roof, and that will be the raya, that it's not good anymore, but we're going to come back to that. So anyways, the raya will be from here, but let's finish the rice. Or if you have a bridge, or if you have a cave, it's a graveyard, a beis hakvaris, a beis hachayim, but she'ein lahem beis dira. Or if you have a beis hakneses, she'ein lahem beis dira lachazim. Or lahavdil beis averis kichavim, she'ein lahem beis dira lakimarim. Or you have a ha'uravais, you have a stable, or oitzarais, or a storage room, she'ein lahem beis dira. Or b'chlal, a boy, shia chuma'ara, by default, according to most of the Rishonim, even if people live there, it's not considered a livable place. Or b'chlal, a fence, just because there's a fence, if fence is not considered a beis dira. Or of a shoivach, or if you have a chicken coop. Or b'habayish of a sfina, right before we spoke about the house near the beach. We'll see what house. Oh, that extends. What happens if on the water you have it today? It's called a houseboat or a boathouse. A boathouse is not called a house. It's interesting because it doesn't have a location. It's moving around the whole time. Okay, so now the Gemara goes back to the Boya. What did we learn before? That if you have a nefesh that used to have a house for a guard, for a shaymer, but now it became breached. But from two sides, and my love, what remained, the ikatikra, 2 walls and a roof. And on that, the Braisa says it's not considered a house. So dafka 3 walls, but if there's 2 walls, even with a roof, it's not considered a bias. And more love dafka. Maybe that the nefesh, the house over there, the tomb building, was that 2 walls breached, and it doesn't have a roof. Maybe if it would have a roof, it would be considered a house, and therefore this is a boya deloyet shita. When the Braisa said baya shabayam, like we mentioned, people did not live. If you had a city on the island, and then away from the city you had this house near the coast, it wasn't common for people to live there. And again, if you're not living there, then it has to serve. It has to be functioning for a service that's chashuv enough to make it considered the house from which you get to extend the whole tchum. So lamai chazi amarach papa that bayisha also lefanas by kelim shabasvina. They used to build taka these houses right near the coast. So when a ship comes in and you want to unload, you have an area, a safe area in which you can unload your stuff. And again, it's not for people to live, but that is considered chashuv enough to say, it's offering the service. It's considered the house from which you get to extend the city. Then we learned before, again, going back now to this Braisa. Uma'ara, if you have a ma'ara, you have a cave, then ein misaberes ima. Today, the Gemara, Rabbi Torah Braisa, that ma'ara, yes, misaberes ima. So answers the Gemara, Amar Habaya, kishiyesh binyan al piyo. The ma'ara itself, taka is not considered the base dira. But if there was a house built, mamish, by the entrance of the ma'ara, a house is a house. Well, the question is, if you have a binyan, then it's not about the ma'ara. Then why would Rabbi teach that ma'ara misaberes? It's not because of the cave. So the Gemara says no. The case of Rabbi was the house itself doesn't have the minimum required amount. And what's the smallest amount of bias? Guys, it's amazing how people lived in these houses. 4 amas by 4 amas. That's called a bias. So he had a house that was only 2 amas by 2 amas, or 3, whatever. It was less than the 4. Elama, it was built in a way that the person living in the house also made use of the cave to complement the minimum size for the house. So that's the chiddush. The ma'ara per se is not considered a house. Obviously, if you have a bias, well, a bias is a bias. But if you have to use both the bias and the ma'ara, that's where the Rabbi is machadish, that's the Braisa, that is considered a house. Okay, weiter. Amar Rafuna, Yoshvei Tzirifim. Now, how to define a hut and a house, I don't know. So the huts were made out of hadassim. It was made very flimsy. We're going to learn about other types of burganim that as long as they are placed within the karpef area, they do extend. And so there's a certain, there's different madregas of a flimsy little hut. We're speaking about the flimsiest type of hut. So Yoshvei Tzirifim, even if there's a bunch of chevra living in huts near the other. I'll say like this, people go camping, that's a great example. And you have many little tents built one near the other. And now, when you go camping now, you got to know the dinam of the tchum because you're normally camping out there. So here comes the question. Do we at least say, I was going to shavis in my tent, but I have neighboring me other tents. Let me first, ki'ilu, apply the dinam of this Mishnah, right? Let's say the tents are in a circle. Let's consider all of this a city, and then we can place a square around the city, and then we can, with the corners that we gain, do we do that or no? Or every hut is dalodamas, but the moment you leave your hut, then you have to start counting the tchum. So Rafuna is saying that if you are yoshvei tzirifim, that it's not considered a city. Ein moeded in land, elomi pesach botem. Very important rule. Frek the Gemara masiv Rab Chizda on the din of Rafuna. Pashit. We're going to learn the source. How do we know that our grandparents' area where they camped during the travels in the Midbar was 3 parsa and 3 parsa? Where do we know that from? From here. But we'll see how that's a kasha, because we're going to consider the tents that we lived in for the 40 years not better than huts, not better than the tzrifim. So what do we learn over there? Vayachnu, when it's at the end of Masik, when we're going through the Masois. Vayachnu ali yarden, from the area of Yishimois. It says further, ad avel hashitim. So we knew exactly where that is. And the Amar Rabba bar Chana, in the parentheses, right? Amar Rabbi Yechana. That I want you to know that Lididi Chazi Liyahu Asra. I went there and I measured it. I wanted to know how much space did we occupy. And Vahava Tolosi Parsa, guys, one parsa, remember, one parsa is 4 mil. One parsa is 8,000 amas. 8,000, one parsa. It was 3 by 3. Now hold on. Now here comes the kasha. You're telling me that huts don't form a city. When a Yid needed to relieve himself during those 40 years, we learned in Abraisa. See, the problem with relieving ourselves was that we never knew in what direction Hashem will lead us in our next journey. So one thing we were allowed to take as a given is that we're not going to go backwards. So whichever place we came from, and again, the assumption was we're not going back in that direction. It was over there that we built these outhouses when we camped in a certain location, which also meant that if a Yid was in the opposite side, he needed to walk on Shabbos and Yom Tov all the way to the other side, which is now 3 parsa. You're kidding? Again, 1 parsa is 8,000 amas. Many, many, many times beyond the Tchum. Now, I know that Tchumen is midrabanan. Guys, many Rabbanan say it came from right away in the beginning. Again, the presumption is that we have this Tchum from the times of Moshe Rabbeinu. And the time was if we would be allowed to relieve ourselves to the sides. I know the kasha would still be here because the people that lived in the center, just getting to any side would have to walk 1.5 parsa. You still have a kasha. We're just pointing out the max of how much people needed to walk. Now, that would not be a question if we were to say that huts form a city. Who cares? Then wherever we stop, that's a city. If that's a city, the whole city is Daled Amas, no problem. When you have to go out of it, you have 2,000 amas in each direction. You have 2,000 amas in each direction, so the outhouses, the latrines, were built within that area. But now that you're telling me that huts are not chashul enough, even though it's a hut, people live there, so then how do they walk all there? Says the Gemara now, Amar lei Rava diglei midbar kamrat. I know degel means a flag, but that's the lashon that we also learned so much of Masechta Shabbos, the expression of our, both the sojourns, the traveling, and the resting, the masois, since we traveled with flags, and we had every shevet had their color, and then we had each side had the group of 3. So it's called diglei midbar, that's different. Is command the kaviyah lohudame. I know they lived in simple sukkahs and tents, but it was considered a permanent structure because it was al pi Hashem. Guys, if you remember the sugya of soiser almanas livnois, then we had the shita that says soiser almanas livnois b'mekayimai, and then the whole kasha is, if soiser almanas livnois b'mekayimai is the only isur of Melech Shabbos in the whole midbar, we never rebuilt in the same place. So even on Mekayimai, we said al pi Hashem yachnu, al pi Hashem yisol. If you remember that sugya in Shabbos, but coming back over there, it makes sense. We were traveling so much al pi Hashem, we experienced the hashgacha prata so strongly that doesn't matter how flimsy your physical house is, it's kavua. It's not about the kaviyos of your bricks, it's about your perception of your kaviyos. So nowadays, if a person lives in a tent, they might perceive themselves to only be living in a tent. When we were in the midbar, we understood that we are living in God's care. And we felt that more kavua than people feel now in a house, and therefore don't ask from over there. Another din, a very important limitation to the law of the hut, that huts don't form a city. Amar Rav Chinana Barav Kahana, Amar Rav Ashi, if you have no city to begin with, you only have huts or tents, that doesn't make a city. You have your tent and 2,000 amas outside the door of your tent. But if you begin with a city, and then adjacent to the city you have additional tents, now what's the definition of a city? So now we're learning it, that If you have the minimum of 3 chatzeros, each one having 3 batim, this forms a ir. Once you have this as a city, and now if around it, right, Kaminig, South America, and now sadly Los Angeles, you have now shanty towns. As long as it is adjacent to a city, yes, we consider that a addition to the city. Then the huts become established. Okay. Now that we spoke about a little Agadah, now that we spoke about people that live in a very flimsy home, people that live in huts. Now, living in huts also meant, like tents, that they never really stayed that much in one place. They kept on traveling. Or people whose lifestyle is hoilchen midbaros, says Rav, their lives are not lives. Rashi says, in other words, they have no pleasure of life. You lose. The glamping is a chiddush from our generation. Yeah, glamorous. Then it was nothing glamorous. You know, you don't have running water. It's not a life. And furthermore, that their wives and their children are not theirs, which means that it's a type of lifestyle that leads to a lot of adultery. And therefore, your wife is not your wife, and worse, your children are mamzerim. Tanya Namihachi, Eliezer Ish Biria Oimer, that Yoishrei Tzrifim are like those who are Yoishrei Kivarim. Like Rashi says over here, 5 lines from the bottom. Kimesim, the fish and mechusarim hanoahein, and they are so subject to the elements, right? They get, every time there's a ruach, every time there's a flood, whatever it is, right? They get beaten up from it. And number 2, wow, kol behema. In other words, they are like a behema, meaning that they're not legitimate. There's a lot of mamzeros there. And why are there mamzeros? So the Gemara gives 2 reasons. Since there's no bathhouses, so the men who need to bathe need to travel, and other people in the area know that the man is not home and he's gone for a long time. So a person who is a noyef will take advantage and seduce his wife. Rabbi Yochanan says, because when the women have to go to the mikvah, again, since there's no mikvah right around where they live, so they have to go for a long trip. And furthermore, one asks their fellow to walk with them, they're afraid to walk by themselves, it becomes known. And again, a noyef, a man, will go after them, and as a general rule, there's going to be women that sadly will be raped by them or will be seduced by them. And again, there'll be a lot of mamzeros. Now, my benayu, the Gemara says, if there's a nahar of the samach labesa, was if the mikvah is resolved, if the women don't need to travel, right? So then there's no fear that while the woman is going to the mikvah, she's, God forbid, going to have a relation or on the way back. But that won't help if the issue is because men have to travel to bathhouses, then people did not take their weekly bath or whenever they took it in a nahar. They went to a bathhouse. And if you are living in a lifestyle that demands of the men to leave and people are aware of when they are leaving, then unkosher men take advantage of that and they create relationships with their wives, and ultimately there's a lot of mamzeros. Now, again, we're speaking about living in this lifestyle and that's lifestyle. So, Amar Afuna, listen to this. Kol ir she'ein ba yarak. If a city doesn't have access to vegetables, ein Talmud Chacham, Rishoy, Ladrba, you're not allowed to live there. Zok Rashi, don't get excited, vegetarians. There'll be a stira in a moment. The last line. Lechi shehayarak toiv l'maycho. Number 1, it's very good for you. Number 2, v'nilkach b'zel, it's very affordable. And therefore, it's going to allow you to learn Torah, coming off the sugya of Torah. You're spending the minimum amount of time working. So you have to live in an area where you can take a live or very little. You frag the Gemara, are you telling me, remember the Yarik Ma'aliyah, the Hatanya Shloisha, Marabin Asazevel. Marabin Asazevel means that when you eat them, it increases the amount of waste that your body produces, and that's not a healthy thing. Number 2, it causes one's posture to be bent over. The joke that people make on health stores, I'm fully supporting all of the health Whole Foods, but people in there, they don't eat meat. They're not gesund sometimes. They're stooped over. And the noiklin echad mechamish meis. and they take away eating the vegetables, living off vegetables actually diminishes your eyesight. And a person who eats a lot, pas kibar, coarse bread, in other words, the part of the flour that remains after the fine flour is removed, right? Super 7-grain whole wheat, that's one negative thing. Number 2, v'shecher chadash, fresh beer. Dafka was speaking about date beer. If it's fresh, if it didn't sit enough time, it's not good for you. And here, v'yarak, hastai kasha, yarak is not good. Answers the Gemara, depends what vegetables. You know, there are vegetables that grow above the ground, and then there are vegetables that grow in the ground. And we're going to focus specifically like Asha. Rashi has 2 versions. We're learning the second explanation of Rashi. The tume vekarte, garlic and leek is the healthy ones. That's the venira be'enai Rashi. And the statement of the Baraisa is b'shar yarke kedetanya shum yarak. Garlic is a vegetable, and kedeshim leeks are at least half vegetable. Half it means the half beneficial. The half as good as garlic. And the third good vegetable, again, they are all ones that grow in the ground, that need a tznoin. If a radish appears, then need a sam chayim. All right, let's go a little bit further. So v'hatanya need a tznoin, need a sam hamavis. So the says, like Asher. Kan, ba'olim, the leaves of the radish are not healthy. Kan, the first price is b'imais, the bulb itself is very good. And furthermore, kan sachama, radishes, even the bulb itself is healthy only if you're eating it during your Maisachama, because radishes cool your body. So if it's very hot, it's very good. Kandi Maisak Shamim, when you are already cold, to add to that radishes, that is not healthy. God willing, to be continued. Wow. All right.
Yeah, Rabbi, question.
Yes.
You mentioned that Tchum Shabbos is Midarabanan. I thought we learned that was a Machlokas Tanaim, Rav Akiva.
I should have mentioned that. Yeah, but we don't pass like Rabbi Akiva. Very good.
Okay.
And another thing, Yaakov, that you have a Machlokas Rishonim. What about the 12,000 mil? Many Rishonim hold that the 12,000 mil is Midaraisa L'Kol Alma. We don't paskin. The Rambam doesn't paskin that way. We paskin that since we don't paskin like Rabbi Akiva, the whole Tchumen is Midrabanan.
Thank you.
Yeah, my shaila would still be, how does anybody who is camped in the front of the camp, every time anyone needs to go to the bathroom, they're hiking 3 parsois? It sounds ridiculous.
I would say, Danny, that there was.
Unless they didn't go to the bathroom.
No. I was thinking that people had their own private back house, but they made public. It's about individualized a little bit, and then it was properly covered up. Versus having large bathhouses. All right, guys, the next daf is really going to be amazing. Again, I'm using my Hoyt V'Hadar. You will probably need to have pictures again for the next daf to be able to chop it properly. But nonetheless, if you don't have it somewhere, God willing, you'll get the content nonetheless. Okay. With the help of Hashem, we are learning ERUVIN Daf Nun Vav. As we began speaking about the disadvantages of living in a lifestyle, we have to continuously move about. We spoke about types of foods that are beneficial or detrimental. We're going to have a little bit more on that line regarding over-exercising is very unhealthy. We're going to come back again. We're going to give continuity to the dinim that we are learning here in the Mishnah and in the Braisa regarding placing first the city's tchum and the leniencies that we allow. Then how to place after you place the boundary of the city, how to measure the tchum. 2 steps. In both of these steps, there are a lot of kulas. But since we're going to be mentioning, as we learned already in the last daf and in the Mishnah, about when you put a box around the circle, you place it in the same directions of the world. That means that where do you put the line of the box? So the northern part of the line is in the direction of the north, the south in the direction of the south. So we're going to be learning about what happens if they didn't have a compass. What happens if you don't know where north is and where south is? So we're going to learn different ways of figuring out, without a compass, where is north and where is south. Because of that, we're going to go into a little bit the sugya of Tkufais, and Shmuel was the great master. So we're going to learn a little bit about Tkufais. We're going to learn a little bit about real astrological simanim. Now, of course, we learned this in Shabbos, that Ein Mazel Yisrael, but nonetheless, we're going to learn some amazing tips, which are easy for people like us, the Cheshbon, to know that if certain phenomena happen in the heavens, when they happen, this will affect certain, al pi teva, it's going to affect certain happenings in the world. And here again, we say that a yid, especially through Torah and mitzvahs, that we can rise above it, but there's a certain chachma of astrology that we'll have on Daf Nun Vav, Amud Aleph, and on Daf Nun Vav, Amud Beis. Oh, it's going to be amazing. Now, the Nakuda will be like this. As we mentioned, there's boundaries of the city, and then there's the adding of the 2,000 amas. The asmachta that we learned a few daf ago, minayin for 2,000 amas, was learned from the din of the Midrash that was placed for the Arei HaLeviim. So God gave to the Leviim 48 cities in which they are designated to live in, and around each city we needed to leave 2,000 amas. And the Torah specifies that those 2,000 amas should be divided as following. The closest 1,000 amma to the city should be completely open. It beautifies the city, that when you enter the city, right around the city, there's open space. And then the latter, the farther 1,000 amma of the 2,000 ammas, no houses, but you can plant a field, grain, you can plant vineyards. It can be used for planting. Now, when you hear that, what does it sound to you like? That the open area is half of the 2,000 amma, right? You have 2,000 amma, 1,000 by 2,000. The closest 1,000 is open. The latter 1,000 is planting, so it's half. There's a Braisa, Tosefta, that says that the open area is a quarter. A quarter. So we're going to spend today, God's willing, we'll get through 2 answers, and then on tomorrow's stuff, we're going to explain how that area is really only a quarter. All of that will be based a lot on the dinner that we already began to learn. The nakuda simple is that the 2,000 amas is not the what you think. You don't take a measuring stick and say, 2,000 amas. First, you square off the city. That already adds a lot of space. Then you have to know how to place the 2,000 amma tchum. It's always done in a way where you have a lot more than you think. We're going to speak out that when you leave, if you're living in a circular city, when you leave the edge of the city, sometimes you can walk 3,200 amas, not 2,000 amas. 3,200 amas will be halachic, the halachic 2,000 amas. So based on that reality, it's going to work that when it comes to the open area, for the open area, we don't square anything. The open areas, if there's a circular city, then you get 1,000 amas that is wrapped around the circle. That is what has to remain open. And there's going to be times that that circle will be only a quarter of the 2,000 amas, because the outside part of the 2,000 amas, even by the Levium, are cheshbon the way we cheshbon it for the Tchum Shabbos. And a lot more of that. Okay, so Nachmal guys, we are 6 lines from the top of the Amid on Daf Nun Vav. Continuing about, we spoke about the health or the benefit of vegetables, or that the vegetables can be very detrimental to your health. And now let's learn about, there's eating today and there's exercise. So now that we covered the eating part, now let's go to the exercise part. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. If a city has very steep, it's not just ups and downs, but the ups and downs demand of you a overexertion, then both the people and the animals that live in the city, they die in middle of their normal lifespan. We don't see that. People used to live until they were 60, till they were 70. People didn't die when they were 35. Ella explains the Gemara. What Rav meant to say was, they become old in middle, and 35 they get old. Yeshua, and he gave an application. We're speaking about an area there in Babel, that Hani Moiliyasa, the Beibidi, or the Beinaresh, that the steep roads that were in the cities of Bidi, and we always learn about Naresh. We learn about both of them. You have to remember Chachamim did. So these are the examples that because of them, as Kanun, they are what caused me to become prematurely old. In other words, there's exercise is healthy, and overly exercising not only is not healthy, but a person brings on old age. Okay. So now So now we are coming back to the first, from the earlier dinim in the Mishnah and then in the Braisa. If the city is already a square, I don't care if the northern line of the city is facing due north or not. I don't care. We don't place another box around the box. But if the city is circular, and the first thing we do is, before you begin counting the 2,000 amas of the Tchum, when you have to establish the boundaries of the city, is that no, you don't measure from outside of the city. You place the circle of the city in a halachic box. How do you place the box? So we learn Tanach Rabban and Belelli. Then MERCAVA b'ribua olam. Make sure that you place the line in which direction do you place the line. So the northern part of the box should be aligned exactly due north. The southern side should be, once you place one line correct, everything else will fall in place as well. I'm mentioning north first because so does the Bryce. So the Rabbi olam, nice and fine, it looks fine. Olam, udroim olam, and v'simanach. Now, what's v'simanach? So today you tell a person you're placing a line. Well, make the northern side, put the line, a line to north. How do you know where north is? Today you'll pull out your phone, you'll have a compass on it. Or not, you'll be from, you won't have a smartphone, you're going to have a compass. Okay, so now we're beginning with simanim. So one of the common simanim that everyone then made use of is that they were very familiar with the constellations. And there are two constellations. We're giving the one in the north, V'simanach. Eglah is what we call today Taurus. Taurus is not the most northern constellation, but it's the one that's the most visible to the north. And it's always going to be in the north of the heavenly equator. So look, when you see the Eglah, that's north. Akrav, so again, Eglah is not the most north, but it's the most visible in the north. The Akrav, or actually the tail of the scorpion, is are the stars that go the most out in the south. The Akrav B'Darim. So once you get that clear, you know where north and south is, and then when you start measuring the Tchum, before you begin measuring the Tchum, you know how to place the box which you're placing around the city. Now, Rabbi Yossi says, because you're not familiar yet with the signs of the zodiac. So then he says, I'll give you another easier way to figure that out. And he's going to be using the sun. Guys, it's very easy. It's very easy. The details, you'll chop, but the Nakud is very simple. We're learning here about Hashgacha Pratis in Los Angeles. So those of us who, people live west of La Cienega, people live east of La Cienega, the pioneers. Let's speak about those of us who live towards the west of Las. I'm just mentioning this is because we drive to Shul for Shachris, very common. And many times the sun hits your eyes because if you're living west of La Cienega Boulevard, then driving towards the east. But everyone notices is that the sun is not always going to be on your eyes because the sun doesn't go exactly on top of airdrome, right? Sometimes it goes more to the north, sometimes it rises more to the south. Now, when the sun rise east, sunset west, the sun doesn't go perfectly around in a circular way, but it arcs always to the south. It arcs, it goes on a tilt in our perception. So the northern summer, you'll realize it's going to be left of airdrome. Or if you're driving on Pico, it's going to be left of Pico. It's going to be in the north. I'm saying if you're going from west to east. During the winter, it's going to go to the opposite side. It's going to go towards the south. Now, since the sun always arcs towards the south, think about that. And that's why there's going to be a lot less day hours during the winter. Because if it's coming up already in the south, it's traveling arc always to the south. And it's going to set, not in the west in the middle, it's going to set southwest in the winter. So there's a lot less space in the sky that it has to go through. It's going to happen a lot quicker. During the summer, it's going up, not direct west, east, it's coming up northeast. It's going up northeast. And it's arcing to the south. It's not going down center west, it's going down northwest during the summer. So there's a lot more space that it has to cover. But the bottom line is just this nekuda, that once you remember, you know where east is from sunrise. But when you remember that, look at the east, and if during summer the sun is going more to the left, that's north. So make a dot over there on your map. Then in winter, it's going to be coming up to the south. Make a dot over there. Drawing that line, that's east. Now just go sunrise and sunset. When you look at the sun coming up summer, it's coming up not east, it's coming up northeast. Put a dot over there. Where is it going down? Northwest. Northwest. So now make a line for you between the sunrise and the sunset. That line is facing north. That's due north. Gewaldig. Let's read it inside. MERCAVA Tkufa means the seasons of the years, summer, winter. We just use summer, winter. You can't use spring and fall, because spring and fall, the sun comes up from the center of east and it goes down to the center of the west. That's going to give you that won't give you a perfect alignment. During summer, make a dot where it comes up. Like we mentioned, it doesn't come up in the center east, it comes up northeast. Then when it sets northwest. So if you make a dot where it comes up from, and you make on your drawing or on the ground a dot where it goes down, then connect it with a straight line. That is Penei Tzafin, that's due north. So Penei Tzafin. Chama yoytze b'yom katzer, winter, and v'shekas b'yom katzer, since it goes up southeast, winter. It goes down southwest. Make a line between these two dots. Zeh Penei Darim. Kufas Nisim, Kufas Tishrei, when it comes to spring. Right, and when it comes to fall, then you can't find out Penei Tzafin, because over there, Chama yoytze b'chatzi mizrach v'shekas b'chatzi mayrov. Now another detail. Since the sun is arcing always to the Darum, so you have to understand the sun is going around the world arc. So if you can have that in your mind, obviously if you have a picture, it'll be a lot easier. So during the winter, when at day the sun is more towards the south of the sky, that means that at night, since Chazal knew obviously that the world is circular and the sun goes under it, even though we have other Chazals that say otherwise, but we're going to focus in over here. So it's going to go in the opposite direction. So it's during the winter, it's going to be more on the south of the heavens. During the winter at night, under the world, it's going to be, for you, more towards the north. And this is the meaning of the pasuk, Shenemar, that Hoylech el Daraim, v'soivev el Safin. Hoylech el Daraim, the sun, always, winter, summer, always, when you look up, when you can see the sun, it's not going up and down in a straight, aligned with where you're standing. It's always going to arc to the south. That's the meaning of the pasuk, Hoylech el Daraim. When it says in the verse that Soivev el Safin is at night. And now we understand the continuation of this pasuk over here. When it says Soivev Hoylech Haruach, Soivev, around and around, circling. So says the Braisa that Elu Pnei Mizrach or Pnei Mayrov, and what? Pa'ameh Mahalachtum. Sometimes during the day, the sun will be in that part of the heavens during the day. And sometimes the Bachlal won't be there during the day. Like in winter, it's not going to be towards the north. It's going to be almost only in the south. But it doesn't mean that the north doesn't get the sun. It just means that when will the sun be in the northern part? When it's under the earth during the night. So Mahalachton is during the day. The Sibov is the night. So really the sun is going to be in all sides of the horizon. Question is, for you or for at night, okay, so wherever it is during the day, it's in the opposite side during the night. But coming back over here, the mila that we have now is that even if you don't know how to look and to discover the stars of the zodiac, so you cannot establish Penei Tzafin, Penei Daraim, by looking up into the sky, into the stars. From the sun, you can know it. Placing again the sunrise, which is northeast. Put a dot over there. Look at sunset. That's going to be northwest. Make a line between them, and that's Penei Tzafin. So the Gemara says that Amar Rav Mesharsha, I disagree with that. Like Rashi writes the first line under, because the emes is that real north is a lot more. Again, if I'm facing La Cienega, if you are on Pico, you're facing La Cienega, and you see sunrise, the sun is not coming up from the north. It's coming up from the east towards the north. Really, north is further. And when you say further, don't go in a straight line because the world is circular. So you don't have it exactly. It says that Amashasha last line of the Tanya that Mizrach is to finest. The sun doesn't come up mamish from the corner of east and north. It doesn't mamish go down Bikeren Maravis to finest. It doesn't do it that way. Yes, it doesn't come up from the center of the east. I know that. That's only Tishrei and Nisan. It goes a few degrees towards the north, or in winter degrees towards the south, but not all the way to the corner. And it never goes down. So just to make it clear, when you're drawing the lines of Pnei Tzafin, Pnei Darim, using the sunrise and sunset, summer, winter, you're not getting exactly the Pnei Tzafin because it's not coming up from the northern eastern corner. Okay, now that we're speaking about the movements of the sun, so my friends, just to give the following words of introduction. When we're going to use the word Kufa, we are speaking about seasons. A year has 4 seasons, right? Summer, autumn or fall, winter and spring. And we use the names of the seasons, sometimes is as we mentioned, right? Kayetz, we have this in Parshas Noach, but we're going to be using the months of the year, of the Jewish year, like Nisan is the Tkufa of spring, right? Tkufas Tishrei is the Tkufa of fall. And then you have Teves and you have Tam. Has everything to do only with the sun. We have to establish first, how many days does it take for the sun to circle around the world? What does it mean? The sun circles around the world every day. Okay. So B'kitzur, using the Rambam's model, which is the emes, that the earth is in the center, and putting everything else around the world. When you go into the 8th Galgal, it is over there that you're going to have all of the stars that form the constellations. We take all of the stars of the constellations and we project it upwards into the Galgal Hachi. So we have now this imaginary images of the stars in the Galgal Hachi. The sun relative to the zodiac, not relative to the earth, every day it makes a circle, is only moving approximately 1 degree. What's that 1 degree? The whole circle we divided into 360 degrees. If the sun Taka would have moved 1 degree a day, then after 360 days, it would come back to where it started out at. Meaning again, we're using where it started out. When you align the sun with the mazolos, every day 1 degree, for the sun to reach that same place in that mazel, you need 360 days, but that's not the case. It's moving a little bit less than 1 degree. We have a machlekes between Shmuel and Avada. How many days is a solar year? And Al Pi Chasidus, how we explain how can there be a machlekes and mitzias. If we'll have time, we'll speak about that a little bit later. Shmuel, who was one big expert, who halacha follows Shmuel sometimes, says that the year is exactly 365 and 6 hours, or 365 and a quarter day. Means every 365 and quarter days, the sun comes back to the same place vis-a-vis the mazolos. Davado, which we know has a more precise movement of the sun, says that the sun moves a little bit less than that. The sun moves a little bit quicker than that the sun will come back to its place 365, 5 hours and around 55 minutes. Not Negeya. Shelv Ravada, just to know that we're going to be focusing on Tkufa Shmuel. Actually, we're going to be learning statements that Shmuel made. Okay, that's number 1. Now, very simple. Since a year, now that we established, has 365 days and 6 hours, divide that by 4. Why divide that by 4? I want to know how many days need to pass for us to enter into another season, having 4 seasons. So it's 365 and 6 hours divided by 4, and the number will be 91 days, 7.5 hours. The beauty of Tkufa Shmuel is that it's precise. Okay, now 13 weeks is 91 days. Pashut. If we are now looking at the hour of the day, I'm not looking at the day, I'm not looking at the calendar month, the hour of the day. We have a Messiah that for certain dinim, even though we just celebrated now Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, marking the creation of Adam and of the world, B'Tishrei, but as we learn in Rosh Hashanah, it's a machlekes tanoim, and it's amazing that in our halacha, we don't always paskin like Rabbi Eliezer. Actually, when it comes to our tradition as when was the first tkufa? When did the first season begin? At what time it began? The first tkufa was Nisan. And we have the Tosfos in Rosh Hashanah explained a lot in Hasidus that there's the creation b'poil, then what the Tosfos calls the thought of creation, Olam HaToyu sometimes called, that first got created and thought, and then in action, we count for both. We don't only count Tishrei. We have a tradition that the first Kufa happened at Wednesday, 6 p.m. Wednesday is because that's Tuesday night is when God created the sun. Nisan. Tkufas Nisan happened 6 p.m. So now Shmuel says something amazing. The Tkufa of Nisan will always be either 6 p.m. or 12 a.m. or 6 a.m. or 12 p.m. Why? Because since the space between one Tkuf and the other is 91 days and 7.5 hours, and there are 4 Tkufas, if you have a tablet that goes out, you'll see Pashit. So Tkufas Nisan was Wednesday. It was Wednesday 6 p.m. The next one is going to be like the 91 days is in perfect 3 weeks. So now you have 7.5 hours. The next Tkufa, the Tkufa of summer of Tammuz, will begin 1.5 hours. So if this was 6 p.m., when is going to be, I'm just looking at the hours, when will be the beginning of the Tkufa of summer? At 1:30 a.m., 7.5 hours, 7.5 hours. The next Tkufa is going to be at another, you got that? Another, because it's 7.5 hours, add another 7.5 hours. When you do that 4 times, if this year's Tkufa of spring was Wednesday 6 p.m., next year is going to be 1 day and 6 hours later. Next year's Tkufa is going to be of spring, Thursday, 12 a.m. And then the next year is going to be Friday, 6 a.m. It's always going to be 6 hours later. That's the first statement that he's making. Let's begin with that. Says Shmuel, Amar Shmuel, ain't Tkufas Nisan a Felice, based on the cheshbon that we just made, since every season you add 7.5 hours, the 91 days is rounded off, it's perfectly 13 weeks. So if you add 7.5, then you're going to come, it's always going to land 1 day and 6 hours later, always, the Tkuf of Nisan. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to be in the same day of the week. For it to hit the same time and the same day of the week, for that you need 28 years. We're just speaking about on what hour of the day. It's only going to be on any quarter. A quarter means that I'll be the emes, even though the Boilam Haza, we have when does night begin? Not always 6 p.m. When it comes to the emes, that means in the true world, every day begins at 6 p.m. Every morning begins at 6 a.m. So it's always going to be it's going to be at quarters, either betchilas hayoim, which is 6 p.m. or 6 a.m. or betchilas halayla 6 p.m. or b'chatzi hayoim 12, what we call 12 p.m. is chatzi hayoim, or b'chatzi halayla 12 a.m. And let's go further. So based on that fact, again, from 1 year to the next, which is 4 tkufas over, every tkufa will fall out. If it's Wednesday, it's going to be Thursday plus 6 hours. Since the first one was 6 p.m., so forever, Tkufas Nisan is going to be at the beginning of, it's going to be 12, right? 12, 6, 12, 6, 12. 6 hours apart. The next one will always be the Tkuf of Tammuz, just at 7.5 hours. So if it was 6 p.m., when will the next Kufa start? 1:30 a.m. Push it. And then the next year around, if it was 1:30, then you go into 9. You have to add to each one, hour and a half. Add an hour and a half. It's going to be 1:30 or 7:30. Whether it's going to be by day or by night. The next one. Period. And that's based on the fact the aim bein tkufa l'tkufa. That's based on the fact that not like Rav Ado, that has an imprecise number. So this cheshbon is not absolute. But Shmuel is Shitasi that says that a solar year has 365 and a quarter day, and therefore that you divide by 4. So it's 91 days and 7.5 hours, which is why this cheshbon is precise. And once you know when any tkufa of 1 year was, all you need to do, if you want to view again that tkufa next year, add 1 day and 6 hours. And now we're going to learn another din of Shmuel. And for that we have to remember Shabbos Kuf Chaf Tes Amud Beis. Even though people are more familiar with the 12 constellations, but now we're going to go into a whole other koyach of the mazolis that are based on the Shiva Koyach Vilachas. Again, Hashem created them Wednesday night, and Hashem placed the farthest most Shatzam Chanchal, the Ayin Sham for all the details. And as we explained, there are 7 moving planets, and every hour is dominated by its planet. Now there are 7 planets and Chayzer Chalila. So 6 p.m. to what we would call going into Wednesday night. The beginning of Wednesday night, the dominant mazel was Shapsai, was Saturn. When will Shapsai be dominant again? 7 hours later. Now that we mentioned that you have 91 days, 7.5 hours, forget about now the 91, 3 weeks. It's exactly 13 weeks. 7.5 hours. 7.5 hours means that if you only want to focus between one tkufa and the other, when the tkufa began, in which one of these 7 planets did it begin, it's going to be a half a planet ahead. A half a planet, like 7.5 hours is a half an hour, half ahead. That's the ein tkufa, meshachas mechaver to elachatzi shah. Based on that, so once you know when any tkufa was, all you need to do is you need to add a half of the next planet. Now says Va'amar Shmuel that ein locha tkufas Nisan shenefelas b'tzedek. You have to figure out if the tkufa of Nisan will begin in the hour that's under the influence of Jupiter. That's a very bad simon. That means al piderech hateva that year the weather will be such that it will destroy all the trees. She'eina mishaberes esrei. Maybe that means fires. I don't know what it means. Maybe it's winds. It's very detrimental. And similarly, that if Tkufas Tevas falls during the mazel again of Jupiter of Tzedek, it's going to be a very dry, no rain. And now a nuance that the moilad of the Levana of that month fell out during the time either that's being dominated by Levana or dominated by Tzedek. Okay. And add to that, a Mazel Yisrael, not to be afraid of this, but this, very rare that you have a specific, when you chazer this, it's very easy to know exactly if this is going to happen. You can predict it. So you know, al pi teva, that certain years are already predetermined to be years that are Meshaberes Esrei Lanos or Miyabeshas Es Hazarayim without, that's for the world. For a Yid, Ein Mazel Yisrael, also as we had a lot, especially towards the end of Masech Shabbos. Daf Nun Vav Amud Beis. If you think that was challenging, that was challenging just the first time around. The next sugya is challenging. What's not challenging? We mentioned in the intro. So we were machadish the Mishnah on these 2 steps. First, when you have a boundary of a city, especially if it's circular, don't count 2,000 amas simply from the boundary of the city. And therefore you're going to have less. No, don't even begin with the tchum. First, you're merabeh of the city. You put a box over the circle, which you gain the zaviyos. Now, how much do you gain? Let me just give you the following. All this is proportional. If the diameter of the circle is exactly 2,000 by 2,000, it's a perfect circle, 2,000 by 2,000. When you put a box, you gain 400 amas. That means that when you physically leave the city, you don't even begin deducting the 2,000 amas. You don't even begin with that. You begin by the corner. The corner is going to be 400 amas away from the circle, but that's only the corner. Now, where exactly do you place the box? That was the first amid. You place it, the ruchais, you place the northern line of the box facing due north. That's why we got into the Sol Sugya. Okay. Now, you leave that picture up. Number 1. So first you have a box. That's the blue box over here. And again, whoever is using the Ois Vahader's book, All right, we're going to be going to page Mem Aleph and going to page Mem Beis. If you have these books, Chavra, you'll chop it. This picture online is perfect. Now, another prat. The other prat is that when you add the tchum, listen to this, my friends. If you would take the corner of the blue blocks on the screen and go out and count 2,000 amas, and place that's the tchum, then if you would go from the center of every side directly up, you would only have 1,428 amas. We don't do that. We will place due north, again, if the city is 2,000 by 2,000, which means that the box that you put around is 2,000 by 2,000. Guys, remember these numbers, 2,000 by 2,000 amas. Take exactly that box and place it north. Take that box and place it south. If you can bring the picture back on the screen. Place the box east, place the box west. That will be step number one. Step number one. That's called the tchum. Then you're going to take exactly that box again, 2,000 by 2,000, and put it in the koronos. When you put, I don't know, whoever put on the picture, please put it back up. When you do it that way, when you do it, okay, we'll go over here. You see over here? Very good. So at the darker, so the blue, the red is the city. It's a round city. Halacha says first put the blue box. And like I mentioned, you gained now 400 amas in each corner. When you put the tchum, the darker boxes in this sugya is called the tchum, remember that. And then the gray boxes are called the koronos. Why are we doing that? Because again, if I were to go ba'alachsoina, if I would go at an angle, and I would go from the edge, from the corner of the box, 2,000 amas, if I were to do that, and that would be the outer parameter of the tchum, then if I would go straight north or straight south, east and west, I would have 1,428 amas. No, I put the 2,000 amas straight north to north. And then I make another box, I make another corner. And when I corner that, from the blue corner, until the edge, you have 2,800 amas. What we added was 400 amas from the circle until the edge of the blue, of the city. We added another 8. I mean, I added to every direction 1,200 amas, aside of the 2,000 amas. That's the halachic 2,000 amas. So you're going to think we learned a few DAF ago. If you don't know where the tchum is, walk out of the city and count your average step. And when you take 2,000 steps, boom, well, lav dafka. You have to know where you're walking. If I'm walking all the way in the north of my circle, where it's anyways aligned to the blue, and I'm walking north, you're right, it's only 2,000 amas. But if I'm walking towards any type of alach sign, then I will gain to the corner. I'm going to walk 3,200 amas before I hit the tchum. Now, let's go inside, on top of the amid. When you first, now let's get the picture back up. Leave the picture on the screen. When you first, not the tchum, first the city, when you square the circle, oisin, oisa, kamin, tabla, middle bas, you got to make it into a square tablet. And then the chayzer umarbeya or mirabeya satchumen. And then when you make the tchum, that's also done not in a circle, but it's done in a square. How do you make it a square? The oisin, oisa, kamin, tabla, middle bas. First, if you can please put the picture back up. First, you put the dark, what was before the dark part of the picture. It's 2,000 by 2,000 north, 2,000 by 2,000 to box south, east and west. Verstehst? And then, don't put it at the corner. If you were to put the 2,000 by 2,000 where the dark is in the picture, if you would begin with the corners, if you were to do that, well, taka, you would have from one corner to the other corner 2,000 amas. But if you were to walk straight, you would have much less. We don't do that. Ella, what do you do? Maybe tabla middle bas yel pai mama. And by the way, my friends, okay, and you put it in the corner. The corner 2,000 by 2,000, my friends, will be always 2,000 by 2,000, no matter how narrow the city is. Guys, we keep on using a city that's exactly the diameter 2,000 by 2,000. Okay, that is exactly where the numbers that we spoke about, the 400 amas and the 1,200 and the 800 amas, the total 12. If the city will be a lot narrower, then the circle in the middle will also be smaller. Seder. But in this case, it's a perfect, you have the middle 2,000 by 2,000, that's squared off, then you add due north, due south, and then you add the same size for the corners. Name says, Kumtais, that ho'ir, mistakeres, that you benefited a total. City itself before the Tchum, like we mentioned, Arba Meyas Amma. You know what the 4 Amas are? Those 4 Amas, if you're looking inside the picture, by the brown houses, being that we don't measure from outside the circle. We measure from, before we make this blue box. So the greatest area that you're gaining, which is by the angle from the circle to the edge of the square, is 400 amas on each side. And also by the fact that you don't place 2,000 amas ba'alach soino. You don't do that. If you would have done that, like we mentioned, you would have had much less space. Now that you place it due north, due south, and then you make the box of the corner exactly the same size as the box that you put in the directions. So then when you go by alach soina, you're going to have 2,800. Nimsu, tchumim, mistakrin, shmoyne meyas amma, lakan, and 800 amas lakan. And therefore it comes out, nimsu, ha'ir, tchumim, mistakrim, if I'm leaving the physical city, so I have a side of the 2,000 amas, I have 400 and 800. So that's a total of 3,200, right? So I gain elef masayim lakan, the elef masayim lakan. Shlomo, you were looking perplexed. What's your question?
Thank you. Isn't it 800? How did you get to the 1,200?
Like with 800. After you have this, if you can just leave the picture up, it will be easier. We had over here a blue boundary. The blue boundary was the boundary of the city, the halachic boundary of the city. Be'emes, you already had 400 amas ba'alach soina that no one is living there. So it's 400 plus 28, which means an extra 800. 4 and 8 is 12. Means when you physically leave the city, if you're going in the direction to northeast or northwest, if you're walking in that direction, if it's a circular city, you can take 3,200 steps, and only then you're going to hit the tchum of 2,000 amas. Now, yeah.
Rabbi.
Yes.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, the 400 on the corner of the circle, we got that, right? Where's the extra 800 coming from? If you're staying on that diagonal.
Again, if you can just leave one picture up, whoever's putting the pictures, which I thank you, it will be a lot easier to explain here at least for the web audience. So then like this. One option would be,
give me a second, Rabbi.
Okay, forget about the pic. I'm getting up on this. We'll go over here. I hope you guys can see this. So if I have the city here in the center, I don't know if you can see this picture. Whoever did that, if you can please leave this picture up. Well, we lost it. So if you would place the 2,000 by 2,000 at the corners, if you would place it over here, and you would want that ba'alach soina, it should be 2,000 amas. And if you were then to measure from here, from the center to the top, and you would only have 1,000, please leave this picture up, whoever you put, then you would only have 1,428. But you don't do that. You put the square of 2,000 by 2,000 directly above the blue box, aligned with the ruchos. Now you take the same size box and you put it in the kronos. Now if you're going to measure ba'alach soina, you're going to gain another 800 amas. Okay, we have to move on, but this is, I'll show you this.
I'm just saying, when you look at this picture, the corners are rounded, right?
Yeah, forget about, don't look at the rounding of the corners. That's something that doesn't matter. Don't look at the corner round. Okay. In other words, if you look at this picture, that's what we don't do. We don't do that. We don't do that. We make another corners. Everything is boxed. Box, all boxed. When we gave this 4 and 800, that's only if the city is 2,000 by 2,000. Only. If the circle diameter is 2 by 2,000, that is where we're going to have the numbers that we gave. If the city is smaller, so then the box will be smaller. It's going to be the same proportion, but we're using these numbers only by 2,000 by 2,000. Based on the above, we're going to understand the Tosefta that's impossible to understand otherwise. Pasha, the Kasha is Pasha, the Terutz, and let's see how far we can get. Tanya, this Tanya is the Tosefta. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yosef, that Tchum Arei Leviim Al Paimam. Fakir, that was the whole Asmachta. That was the whole beautiful. Now, how do we measure that? Same way. That will be very negeya. But the pshat is there's 2,000 amas, and those 2,000 amas themselves are divided two ways, meaning that they're out a total of 2,000, but half of it, the 1,000 closest to the city, is what we call the Midrash, which is a mamish, an open area. You can't even plant tfuah. You can't plant vines, nothing. Same elef ama Midrash. When you take out the open area, the outer area you can plant already sadis ukrabim. Now, when you say those words to Ayid and you ask him, okay, how much percent is the open area from the rest? He'll say half, right? If you have 2,000 amas around the city, 1,000 amas closest to the city, the wraparound is going to be left open. The other is to plantation, half and half, right? No, says the Tosefta Nimtzah that the Midrash is a fourth. The Midrash is only a fourth, and all of the rest is Sadis Ukaramim. Boom. That's gonna be the impossible question to answer. So first of all, that's clear. I mean, the fact that you leave 2,000 amas, the fact that from the 2,000 amas, 1,000 is taka left completely open. That's the pasuk we just learned a few daf ago. Again, the asmach that came from there, that it says mikir ha'ir v'chutza is elef savit. The 1,000 amas that are completely opened are completely, guys. I'm just asking whoever's doing the pictures, please leave it. It's going to come. Leave the picture up. Okay. So you leave 2,000 amas. Now, the Torah is telling you sabev esoir ba'elef. Now, really, the Gemara is the chacham over here. These words sabev esoir ba'elef will be the answer to everything. Remember the sabev. Sabev means you don't make a square, but we're not beginning with that. So the Gemara says right away, how can it say in the Tosefta that nimsa migrash revia pagav? 2,000 amas. One, the Torah says, leave empty. 1,000 from 2,000 is 50%. Answer number one. Omar Rava, I want you to know that Bar Adam Nishoicha. It makes sense. But Ado, he was the expert measurer. What's the word? A surveyor. He explained to me how that happens. Mishkachas law is going to work exactly in the case that we're giving, where the city is 2,000 by 2,000. Guys, halka. Now, here we start with the numbers. Based on what we learned until now, first you make a box. Now, every box, my friends, every box, the Gemara is using these numbers, is going to be 4 million squared amas by 4 million square amas. Any box around 2,000, around the circle, and all the boxes are this size as we explained, every box is 4 by 4 million squared amas. Now, there's one thing you have to appreciate. Just take a look at this picture. Let's begin with the presumption that since everything is boxed, so is the Midrash. So where would you place the Midrash? If you're going in any direction, top, bottom, side, and side, place a line halfway through it. If you were to place a line halfway through it, remember one thing, the line from the darker box is eating up 50% of the darker box, right? If you place, I'm using the top direction here in the picture. Place a line halfway up from around the blue box to the end, place a line straight. That line is eating up 50% of the black box. It will not eat up 50% of the corners. Why not? Because I also have to put the lines down on the side. The moment you put the lines down on the sides, what you're going to affect is that you will only be eating up a quarter of each corner. That picture that you put up is not good. So I'm asking whoever's putting up the pictures, put it back where it was before. Not helpful. Okay, you have to imagine this. All right, we're not using pictures at all. I quit. Over here. So if you're going to look over here, if you can just section off the area around the city, if you can leave the lines, just if you can, whoever's doing this, please, don't take the picture away. If not, people won't cop it. Just listen to what I'm saying. If you're going to make an imaginary line 50% up from the top, 50% down to the bottom, and you're going to put it on the sides, that line, which will be the Midrash, the one closer to the city, will be kake eating up half of the, what we will call the tchum. The tchum is the dark picture. And it's only going to be eating up a quarter of the karanas. It's going to be eating up a corner of the Koranis because you're also placing lines down in the south. Now, so he says like this, every box is 4 by 4, 4 million square amas. So from the tchum, the total amount of the tchum, if every box is 4 million square amas, how many boxes you have of the tchum? 4. So you have a total of 16 million square amas from the tchum. Koranis Kamahavia, based on what we're learning here, that the city is all exactly 2 by 2, 2,000 by 2,000. Here also, the Koranis will always be 2 by 2. Again, each box is 4 million. So that's another total of 16 square million. So how much is the total, my friends? Remember the number, 32 million square amas. Now, how many of them will you have for the open area? So like I mentioned, from the boxes of the tchum, you're eating up half of it. Now, how much, if you have a total of 16 million from the tchum, half of that is 8. How many million square amas are you deducting from the corners? Every corner only has a quarter of it taken off for the Midrash. So a quarter of 4 million is 1 million, but it's 4. So it's another 4. So Dal Tanya Nidchomen, they take off another 4 from the Koranis. So 8 and 4 is how much? Is 12. So 12, Kamahavia Tresar. So it says, oh, that's Pashit. So how much square amas are being used for the Midrash? 12 million square amas. That's your fourth. Alo, if you're beginning with 32 million, 12 from 32 is more than a third. So the Gemara says, how does that explain anything? What Nimsa, Midrash, Revia? No. If it's 12 from 32, it's more than a third. Says the Gemara, no. You know what you did in Cheshbon correct? We are also counting the box of the center. That's why we're emphasizing that the city was 2,000 by 2,000. Because then when you square it, you have a total of 4 million square amas. So you're not taking 12 from 32, add another 4. It's 12 from 36. Now, does that answer the question? No, because 12 from 36 is now a third. So I see Arba de Masa, include the 4 million of the box of the city, throw it on the 32, you really start out with 36, and the amount of the Midrash is 12 from 36. So that's a fourth. Again, the Gemara says, Akata, okay, it's not more than a third. 12 from 36 is exactly a third. Akata til Sahava answers the Gemara, here's the Nakuda. Kuda is, leave the picture the way it is. But there's one thing, that when it comes to actually putting on the ground the Midrash, we don't begin the Midrash outside the blue box. We don't do that. We only put the actual Midrash wrapped around the circle of the city. So the 1,000 square amas, not the end of the Midrash, not the end of the 2,000 amas. That's exactly, yes, the way you make Tchumen. But since the inner open Midrash open area, please leave the picture, is going to be circular. So it's eating up much less space. Now let's cheshbon how much less space. We're going to kick the number 36 million square amas, which is the total. However, we don't place the Midrash as a square. We place the Midrash as a circle. Now a simple mathematical cheshbon. How much larger is a square? How much more area does it cover over the circle that's within it? It's a quarter more. In other words, if we're saying that every square, my friends, is the total of the Midrash, if it would be squared, it would be 12 million square amas. Alo, take off a quarter. How much is a quarter of 12? Quarter of 12 is 3. So deduct off the 12, 3. So how much Midrash area do you really have? 9 million square amas. What's the number that we're counting from? 36 million. What's 9 from 36? Exactly a fourth. And now the Tisha Mitlasin is exactly the Shita. 9 from 36 is a Revia. Guys, we're in the Sugya. I know it's late. We'll have one more answer. The same Nakud. Says Abaya. I want you to know that you don't have to begin with the city that's 2,000 by 2,000. He's not arguing with the first explanation. He's adding another explanation. That where will this have to say that the Midrash area is actually only a quarter, even if the city is only 1,000 by it. Leave the picture. Don't worry about the picture on the screen. It's 1,000 by 1,000. Now what happens is like this. It's amazing. What's amazing is that the outer corners will always be, Danny, 2,000 by 2,000. That's the way it is. What will change is that the Tchum area, where on the picture in the screen here, it's dark. Instead of it being 2,000 square amas, if the city itself is only 1,000 square amas, it's not going to be 2,000, but it's going to be 2,000 by 1,000, which means that the Tchum box is really, again, saying that every Tchum box is 4 million square amas. Now, by a bias city, the number 4 million is emes by the Koranos, but it's going to be half that amount in the Tchum. Every Tchum is only going to be 2 million square amas. 2 million. Now, how many Tchum do you have? 4. So if you have every Tchum is 2, what's the total amount of the Tchumen? 2 times 4 is 8. Tchumen kama haviyatamya. But the corners always remain 2,000 by 2,000, no matter how large or small the city is. Even though here it's going to be only, even though the city is small as 1,000 by 1,000, the Koranos remain 16. But now, guys, let's make the same cheshbon. Like we mentioned, that the Midrash eats up half of the Tchum, the Midrash only eats up a quarter of the Koranos. If the total area of each Keren now is 2 million square amas, so yeah, each one, so you have 8 million square amas. How much of that is eaten up by the Midrash? Half. So now we have 4 million eaten up, 4 million from the Tchum. Let's go to the corners. The corners, Taka, now have a total of 16 million. But from the corners, you only take off a quarter. So you have also only another, you have 8 plus, you have, right, a quarter. Each one is 4, so you have another 8 and 4, you have 12 million, the same 12 million. So Quran is going to have a shitza. Daf nun zayin amud aleph. Now out of the Tchumen, so half, the Tchumen is always half given for the Midrash. From the corners, you only take a quarter, only eats up a quarter. So a quarter from 16 is fighted for. So you have 12, the same 12, but it's 12 from what? The total of everything now is going to be 24 million, not the 32 million, because the city is much smaller. So 8 from 24, that's going to be your fourth. Mar says it doesn't work. 8 from 24 is only a third. So here again, he gives the same nakuda that when you actually place the Midrash, the open area is not placed beyond the blue. No, you begin counting around the circle. In other words, you use a much lesser space for the first 1,000 amma. And based on the same formula, that kama meruba yasar ala eagle, a fourth. So now you're going to deduct from the 8 that you said you had. You don't really have 8 million square amas for a Midrash. You have a fourth less. When you take a fourth off 8 million, how much do you have? 6. Gavaldik. The sum total area of the Tchumen and of the Koranos, as we mentioned, is 24 million. 6 from 24 is exactly a fourth. The Shita, we'll stop here, God willing, to continue tomorrow. We have to have another 2 answers explaining how the Midrash is not a half, how the Midrash is only really a quarter. That was great. All right, Yidin, let's go, David. That was the best shiur for after Rosh Hashanah. Doesn't get after Yom Kippur.
Chazak Baruch.